Hey, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy day before the 4th of July. It's always one of my favorite holidays. We've got a great pre-4th show for you. We've got some Supreme Court rulings that could really shake up just about everything in the tech world as well as the rest of the world. Who do you believe when an agency tells you to do something? What about the inalienable rights of content creators? That's a great July 4th kind of thing. And do we need a Bill of Rights for developers? We're patriots here. You're watching Techstrong, gang. Hey, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel from Techstrong, and we're back here for Techstrong Gang, a very special edition of Techstrong Gang today. It's our pre-July 4th special. And we have sort of I guess it's the founding fathers of Techstrong Gang. Unfortunately, we had some sickness, and two of our guests, regular gang members today, had to drop for this morning. And, COVID's still out there, as well as just the good old flu. So we wish Lisa and Samantha a quick recovery, and they'll be back on next week's Techstrong Gang. So we had to go to kind of the bottom of the barrel and draft in someone here last second. Actually, we didn't go to the bottom of the barrel, but we're really happy. He's making his second appearance here on Techstrong Gang. It's the CEO of the Futurum Group coming to us out of Austin, Texas today, Daniel Newman. Hey, Daniel, it's great to have you on. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here.
Fantastic. Joining Daniel and I today from up in Lake Placid, he's still covering the Winter Olympics 20 years later. It's our Chief Content Officer, Mike Vizard. Hey, Mike, welcome.
Hey, guys. Lots of Patriots up here. This is the miracle on ice, man.
Absolutely. 1990. That's right. 1980. What am I saying? Also joining us from Futurum Group today, he's our DevOps research analyst. He covers a lot of cloud native. He covers a lot of things. Paul Nashawaty. Hey, Paul, welcome to have you. Welcome and great to have you.
Hey, Alan. Hey, team. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And then last, but certainly not least, he's our CTO and CTA at Futurum Group from high up in the Rocky Mountains.
I may be least, but I've got the best guitars. So, hey, what can I say?
Absolutely. Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, welcome.
Good to see everybody.
So, guys, we're going to do something a little different today, not just because it's pre-July 4th, but because, as I mentioned, we lost two of our panelists for today. And to keep things straight here on our panel, Mitchell and Paul are going to drop for our first segment, and then they'll be back for the Bill of Rights for Developers and Inalienable Rights of Content Creators segments coming up. But so Mitch and Paul will have you back on here in about 10, 15 minutes, but thank you, and we'll see you in a bit. Mike, I'm going to kick it over to you to kick things off here.
All right. There's a lot going on in the world around this whole case involving Chevron. And what people are starting to figure out is that the Supreme Court didn't just rule on this one case. They basically said that all these federal agencies do not have the authority to apply these rather sometimes comprehensive rules that wind up being fairly onerous, and they address those rules can be almost anything. They can be financial rules, they can be spam rules, they can be FCC internet rules. All these things now seem to be in question because, well, it turns out that maybe these agencies don't have the authority to fully apply them in the first place. So, Alan, you're in a previous lifetime, you've been a legal eagle. So what's your take on what's going on here?
I'm still a legal beagle. But look, for purposes of our discussion today, let's limit this to how it affects technology, because this thing can affect everything. FCC, FDA, FTA, all of the federal agencies. Now, they're all chartered usually by Congress passes a bill empowering them, and the executive branch of our government has usually broad authority to carry out the will, or as it is expressed in the act of Congress and signed by the president. But for business to flourish, for businesses to succeed, They need certainty. You can have a bad rule, you can have a good rule, but at least give me a rule that I can bank on and I'll work around it and work through it. When you have rules that are Swiss cheese, though, and if I don't like a particular rule, I'm just going to go down the block and hire a lawyer and institute a claim, and I'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court. That's going to, I'm afraid, create chaos and lack of certainty in our business climate. And that's part of what makes America great, is that we have a stable climate for business. Daniel, you deal with bigger companies. You deal with a lot of the chip manufacturers. How do you think? I mean, if you can't bank on anything, how do you bank on anything?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say I'm the only person that's going to be on this particular Techstrong Gang show that wasn't actually born yet for those 1980 Olympics. So I felt that was important.
Okay, all right, point made.
So not a legal scholar here, but we do work quite a bit with tech companies around policy, regulation. This is an interesting inflection because, you try to kind of think about what was the genesis of giving this power to the agencies. And, the government, and again, this is not partisan, but our government's gotten very large. We have lots of regulatory bodies. We have lots of different branches. And of course, we have things within the executive branch, and then we have the actual policy makers in Congress. And then, of course, we have these agencies, and they're all sort of inflicting their various influence on different industries. And the goal is generally to be an enabler of a healthy economic climate, while at the same time mitigating things that could be done that maybe, whether it's polluting our water, whether it's enabling, cyber risk of the grid, whether it's creating, more sustainable rules to reduce carbon. And so I think what we have is this really interesting scenario in which the regulatory bodies and then, of course, the agencies have been created to sort of expedite focus into certain areas. So, whether, it's the trade commissions that work on regulatory agreements and frameworks for shipping GPUs to countries in which we don't want to give too much AI capability too fast. We've been able to quickly implement controls, and that those controls can be executive, they can be legislative, and I think largely they're agreed upon. But right now, what you sort of alluded to, Alan, that's really interesting, at least in my opinion, is whether it's been like, I think Mazard mentioned CAN spam. And I think that's Canada, but California has similar rules. And then, of course, whether that's been net neutrality rules, whether that's, again, some of these various chip controls, whether that's been data and email storage rules, things that have come down from these agencies are now going to be tried and tested if enterprises feel that those rules are unfair. So like I said, right now, rules that have potentially come down from agencies that have limited the shipments of chips into certain countries for the sake of economic growth and stability, some of these chip makers may challenge these rules and see if they can get an overturn from Supreme Court. That's just a for instance, but I guess where I'm up, and I'm gonna pause here because I could go on and drone on a little bit here, but is what enables us to go fast, which is really important to our economic health and climate here. But at the same time, what doesn't enable bodies to be able to implement rules that are not fair or not at least been deemed fair by a non-biased body? How can, lobbying and influence to agencies enable them to take too much control? How do we manage that without slowing down our economic growth and slowing down enterprise?
I think that's the key, is what do we got to do to have stability and speed and certainty? I'll tell you this, as a former lawyer, lawyers out there are going to be foaming at the mouth, waiting for the starting gun to start, challenging every single one of these agencies' rulings in court and start billing their hours. They're going to bill a lot of friggin' hours on this. And it's going to take years for these things to wind their way through the court system. And then what do you do with your business in the meantime? Do you get a preliminary injunction, a temporary restraining order? Do you just ignore the ruling and damn the torpedoes full speed ahead? This is potential chaos in the business. And one thing businesses hate is chaos, is chaotic times. They need that certainty. They need structure I just think this is bad for business.
So Alan, just one thing I was going to mention to you guys, maybe worth debating is, recently the FTC did a non-compete ban. Is sort of a for instance, right? So they voted 3-2. They're going to ban non-competes. And that's going to obviously put a lot of power back to the individual employees, take a lot of power away from companies. And of course, there's some limitations to that ban. But again, do you not see something like this just getting a flood of Supreme Court cases in which companies are going to say,
of course they are.
We train people, we educate them, we give them all this access, we and then they basically take all their knowledge to a competitor for a few dollars, and it's going to disincent companies investing in employees. I'm just giving a for instance.
No, absolutely. But but who's going to get rich off of this? Lawyers. The fact of the matter is, most non-competes weren't very enforceable to begin with.
To Daniel's point, though, doesn't all this shift this focus back over to Congress that's going to, have to review all these acts and make them more granular and specific in terms of their permissions that are granted to the agencies? It seems like, to me, part of the problem here is that the bills, as they were written by often lobbyists, are just overly broad because they were assuming that the agency could have some discretion. And now we got to go back in and kind of negotiate every little thing because it's not in the bill.
Because you can't. What happens is, when did Congress establish the FTC or the FDA? Congress, first of all, assuming you have a functional Congress, which I'm not even going to get into right here, but Congress paints broad strokes. You can't expect Congress to legislate or decide, are non-compete, take Daniel's example, are non-competes legal or not, or enforceable or not, or what are the caveats and special circumstances, when a non-compete is or is not legal. They're not going to do that. They don't work at that detail. The idea was to have what we call legislative intent, right? Courts, when they look at whether or not an agent, historically, courts look at whether or not an agency was ruling based upon the legislative intent of the Congress, of the people who wrote the bill or that became law when it was passed. What was the legislative intent here? What authority were they giving the agency? Not to get into the pants of every single little nitpicky ruling. Congress passed 12 bills last year. You think they're going to pass a couple thousand things that the agencies do? Yeah. No, it's going to be chaos.
Yeah, so they gave a ton of power to the agencies, and this may look to pull a little bit of that power back, but the problem is just the incredible inefficiency of Congress. There's way too much horse trading. Decisions are not necessarily always made, at any sort of speed or pace. It takes a long time to, of course, make a bill into law. And remember, it was a two-step test, and I just think for everybody out there, this is complicated. It's great, Alan, having you as someone with a legal background. But, one is, the idea was that Congress does speak to some issues. And if so, their law is the overarching and overriding law. But if there is no specific law or statute on an issue, basically this gave the deference to the agencies. And so that gave the agencies a ton of power because there's very few laws, relatively speaking, to all of the policy that's set out by the agencies. So this is it's an interesting inflection. I wouldn't call it a setback entirely, but it makes the agencies a lot less effective, and it puts way too much of the onus on Congress, which can't get things done because of various partisan issues and red tape. So I know we said we wouldn't talk politics, but the politics of getting laws passed will make this difficult. I ultimately think power ends up back with the agencies. That's what they were set up to do. Not always for the best, but I think it's more efficient than trying to have the courts manage it and legislators create bills and laws for it.
I agree with you, Daniel. And the other thing I will tell you, because, SCOTUS came out with some other decisions. One of them is that the chief executive and the executive branch have to have the authority, have to have the ability to fulfill their duties under the Constitution. And the executive branch, Congress doesn't run the government day to day. Congress funds the government. Congress, as I said, points broad brushes, right? It's not just a question of going to law school. Look, I was a political science history major. This is how the founding fathers set this up. Congress funds the government. Congress puts broad policies in place. It's the executive branch that kind of runs the day-to-day of our government. And SCOTUS has said the executive branch has to be free to run the day-to-day of our government. Well, today, it's not just, what is the day-to-day of our government? It's not just the post office. It's the Treasury Department, and it's the DOD, and it's the FTC and the FDA and every other agencies, let alone the quasi-governmental kinds of agencies, NERC and FERC, right, for nuclear regulatory and, power plant regulations. All of these kinds of things are being called into question now. And if nothing is solid, if you can't build on quicksand. And that's my fear here. But
so are we going to miss the bureaucrats? Because, we've been railing against them for so long now. And now it's suddenly we're going to wake up one morning and go, geez, we missed those guys.
You'll never get rid of them.
I just want to run a company at $33 trillion in debt and not worry, because I know that the next trillion will just appear out of thin air. Again, not political. I don't care. Both parties do this very badly. But Alan, just imagine if we could run the shop at, a trillion every quarter.
This is so that's a whole nother issue. That's not the agency spending the money.
You talked about what Congress needs to authorize the government to run. I'm just saying, I don't think that's a great job they're doing, and I would like to.
They haven't done a great job. So if they can't do that job right, what makes you think they can get into even more detail on what the agencies do?
There's my point. Thank you.
So if the agencies can't do it, let's not kid ourselves into thinking Congress can. Anyway, hey, Daniel, you have an open invitation here, to come on anytime. So it's been like 2 months since the last time you're on.
Yeah,
we're gonna try to get you in here.
People on the Futurum and Techstrong team, I want to give everybody the air, and you guys do a great job. But listen, when you got a topic like this and you want me to come, I'm happy to be here. Great to see you guys. If I don't talk again, happy 4th of July.
All righty. Daniel Newman, CEO, founder of the Futurum Group. And of course, Techstrong is becoming part of Futurum Group, and we're having a great time doing it. Daniel, happy 4th of July to you and yours. I know you're heading out on vacation as well, so enjoy. We're going to take a break here on The Gang. We'll be back in just a moment. All right. Hey, we're back here on Techstrong Gang, and we've swapped out Mike Vizard and Daniel Newman, and now we have Mitchell Ashley and Paul Nashawaty with us. And we've got 2 players to be named later and a protected future draft pick in this deal. So I think we made out pretty damn good. Anyway, Paul and Mitch, welcome. Welcome back. Our next topic comes out of a recent article we saw up on social media today, and it was actually an announcement from the White House protecting the inalienable rights of content creators in the age of AI, right? And we hold these to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or something like that. But Mitch, or Paul, who would like to kick this one off?
I'll jump in real quick, Paul. We can kind of take it from there. It reminds me kind of the maker economy, right? People that make things and do things, hobbies become businesses, et cetera. Well, we have an economy of people who create content, right? And I think it's pretty well known secret that many of those people don't work for the big media companies or the Facebooks of the world or places that can create license agreements with Apple and others about does our content go into OpenAI's LLMs, et cetera. It's everyday regular people probably making less than $100,000 doing their work. And so what rights do they have? I think is, what inalienable rights, maybe what rights period do they have for their content? It's so easy to get swept up in the consumption of content going into AI systems today. So that was in part what the White House kicked off is I would call it a community discussion about what do we need or what are the needs of this creator community. It reminds me of our security bloggers network that became the security creators network, right? And how do you foster that group of people so that they can, thrive, do what they do well, and give them not only an audience, but maybe some protections. Now, given the last segment about, what can agencies really do anymore, we're not quite sure. Maybe this is up for grabs as well. But that's at least the start of the conversation. Will it go anywhere? We'll have to see. I mean, it's data point one of an event happening. So, Paul, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Alan, for having me here. I'm kind of in agreement with you, but I also want to add a little bit more color to it. When I think of the content creators, there's, the gig economy is out there. It's some of it's by choice, some of it's by necessity. But I think you're right? When I look at the number of people that make, you say under $100,000, it's a year, it's like 4% or under 4%, which is interesting. But when you work in the gig economy, you get hired to do a job and you get hired to do a task. When you get hired to do that, the rights of the work that you do for that person who's hiring you or that company that's hiring you should transfer with that company. So that company owns the responsibility of putting out that content. So think about it like this. If an organization hires somebody and they create content and that information is incorrect, when the organization puts that information out, who's responsible for that? The organization is, right? Not the individual necessarily that created the content. Now, with that said, the rights of those content really goes with the person who's funding or buying that content to be created, in my opinion. Now, this also goes with a trend that we're seeing across the developer community, which is the skill gap issues. It's not just developers. I've been seeing this across every industry, right? But skill gap issues, it also breeds necessity, where if there is opportunity for somebody to come in to do work, there has to be a little bit of give and take. So unless an organization is going to hire, say, an entity that owns the rights to that content that they're creating, that organization should own that information. And that's just kind of how it works. And when it comes down to the responsibilities.
So, Paul, Mitch, I think you both bring up good points. But to me, there's a couple of things here. So first, at its very core, this is about IP. We get real mad when companies around the world use American IP without permission. Right? At its core, it's a big part of the issue economically with China, for instance, right? The whole idea behind patents and IP protection at some level, to go back to the previous discussion I had with Daniel and Mike around this Chevron and ruling, businesses need certainty. Businesses need a structure to operate in so that they know what's right, wrong, allowed, not allowed, what they can do, what they can't do. The principle of IP, of intellectual property, that if I made something, I created something, someone else cannot rip it off and use it to my detriment or without compensating me is a foundational principle of our economy. Now, yes, you want to hire me to do something and then you're going to use that IP that I created when you hired me. Well, that's a work for hire and that's well-settled law. Of course, you could have it as a work for hire. But that's not the case here in the age of AI. What the AI people are doing is they are taking people's IP that was put out on the internet and then ingesting that into their LLMs of which they train their AIs with, and then regurgitating that IP out in a similar or different form, but nevertheless, it's based on that old IP, and then profiting off of that, and I'm not being compensated for the use of my IP. At its heart, that's the issue here. Now, if you're the New York Times or, one of these big media companies, you have the clout to go to the AI company and say, you're going to compensate me if you're using my IP in training your AI. And that's great. But I'm talking now as the CEO of Techstrong Group. We're a small player here. I don't have that kind of juice. But my 40,000 articles on DevOps.com sure as heck went into, I'm sure, the training of some of the AIs out here. No one's paying us a dime for that IP. And that, at its heart, I think that's what it's about. We can't lose sight of that.
I think it's that and its work product that can come from that IP, right? So it's the IP and its origination. And as you mentioned, work for hire law, well established. It seems copyright law has kind of lost its teeth in this too, or even licensing agreements, right? You may have Creative Commons that you published a blog with. Maybe you distribute as part of Security Bloggers Network on securityboulevard.com. And you said, yes, you can, Creative Commons, you can use it, but you need to attribute it to, the source. Well, that doesn't happen in LLMs, right? So I think there's a lot of things that are being leapfrogged in AI's hunger for data, specifically generative AI, that, is the individual blogger going to be able to sue the Microsofts or the OpenAIs or Anthropics of the world and say, you're using my stuff? It's hard enough for Techstrong to do that, right? More or less an individual person. So it seems to me the Pandora's box has been already thrown open, and we're well past the how do we solve this up front? Is there anything you can do after the fact?
Yeah, well, Mitch, good points, and Alan, absolutely great points talking about this. I think that there is a separation between work for hire and patented or copyrighted infringements or protections. Mitch, I will comment on the fact that what we are seeing in AI is attribution to data sources. So that is coming, right? We are seeing that. It's not as robust as it should be, so to speak, but it is out there. I think when I look at this scenario and I think about it, it's a number of different things. One, if I'm doing research and I read a number of different books or I need to read a number of different articles or whatever, and then I form my own decisions and opinions and then create a product based on that, that's my IP. I was informed by these different things and then I create something. Okay, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if you, well, I should say historically we would have to do a lot of that footwork, and it's a manual process, right? You go out, get books, go out there and get search the internet yourself or whatever it may be. Now that's accelerated, right? It's the screwdriver and drill approach, right? You no longer need a hand screwdriver to screw something, and you haven't pulled the trigger and now you have a drill. So it's happening much faster. And, this is really where I think it's amplifying the problem of if you're just regurgitating there's patent infringements and copyright infringements. Absolutely. That's against the law. That needs to be enforced. And there needs to be, enablers for, not just the large corporations, but also the individuals that are creating that content as well. But I also think that we don't want to over pivot to say that unrealized gains are created, or now we're sue happy because somebody read something and then created something based off what they read. Where's the IP there?
Well, that is the IP is if you created based off something you read, or in this case, in AI ingested. Let me give you a better example, Paul. I write a song. Clearly, I wrote the song. It's my song. The melody, the words are mine, right? Yep. And now you heard that song, and with one of those songs that's stuck in your head, right?
Right.
And then later on that night, you said, I feel like writing a song. And you had this tune in your head. And you may not even have realized that that's the tune you heard on the radio this morning or whatever, but you write a song on that tune. Change the words because they're your words on something, but you use that tune because that was in your head. And now you go out and sell that song.
Right.
Do you think the person who wrote the original tune is entitled to something?
Well, what I think is kind of irrelevant, but I'll give you my...
Well, I'll tell you what the law says about it if you want. I just wanted your opinion.
Yeah, my opinion on this is as long as the creation of the new asset is built on originality and with the guidance and bumpers and guardrails in place, as long as those things are met, and you follow the rules of the law, then sure, you can monetize it. But if you're breaking the rules, then either you have to address the rules or change the rules, right? That's where we're at with AI. It's like, we're starting to add in things on AI to start changing the rules so it applies to this type of scenario that you're describing. Now, I'm curious what the law says.
I'll tell you, Mitch, you're a musician. What do you think?
Well, there's the law, and then I kind of go back to Harlan Howard, who created the phrase 3 chords and the truth. There's a lot of commonality across music, meaning there's only 8 notes in the scale of any song, and usually 3 or 4 chords in the song. There are others that have more than that, but it's all variations, and it's the artistic creation around it, which goes back to intellectual property. That you're creating. Now, that in the music world it's protected by performance rights and copyrights. There isn't intellectual property rights around it. So we have a little bit different thing in tech. But it does remind me of the music subscription business, right? Where all of a sudden all the artists who were creating music and selling CDs or albums or whatever, suddenly you're up on Spotify, and how do they make money, right? And now you do make a little bit of money as an artist to that, but it's tiny. You may not have made a lot of money to begin with, but it's changed the financial of the business drastically. Is that what the creator economy is going to be? Something like that is going to go the way of the music.
But yet musicians are making out okay in the world of Spotify. They get their royalties.
It's because they went independent. That's why they did.
It did break down the big record labels. But back to Paul's question, what does the law say? There's plenty of cases where it's been upheld that if you use someone's melody, you change the words, you owe them royalties on it. You got to stop using it. The bigger cases and most recent cases came out over what they call sampling. What do I know from rap and sampling and all that?
Been listening to some Run DMC, are you?
Well, Run DMC I listen to, Mitch. I'm not that old.
Well, they brought in Aerosmith for their stuff, so they're cool.
Right. Well, but more recently, there's been cases around sampling of music. It became very popular. Who does Astroland? My sons are into
Travis
this, right?
Scott.
Travis Scott and stuff. I mean, these guys do a lot of sampling, and the courts have upheld that. You got to pay royalties on that. Because that's their music you're sampling.
And that's fair, right? And that's kind of to my point. If you're doing sampling within music, or if you're doing sampling within content creation, and in my world, in the developer world, code creation has changed quite a bit over the years, right? There's we've kind of evolved to a development perspective where you're compiling code and you're taking code snippets and making those code snippets work to be more efficient, more effective. That's, quote, sampling of using code to address your business problems. Are there patents and trademarks and royalties and copyrights around that? Absolutely, right. But again, and we see it all day long, right? There are software packages that are created that are using code snippets that may have been protected. But you either pay those royalties or you follow within the rules that are out there. I mean, it's it doesn't. I don't want to make it sound like it's as clean as black and white. But if you're creating something, you have to know what the rules are and what the guidance are, and then stay within those boundaries. That's just the way it is.
I want to jump on your drill analogy, Paul, because we also now live in a world where, let's say my code escapes. It shouldn't have gone into the wild, right? It's intellectual property for the company. It gets scarfed into an LLM, right? In whatever time period, could be seconds or minutes. And moments later, someone else it's appearing on other people's code unintentionally, right? So this whole idea in AI data science of data poisoning, that information has gotten into the system that can't easily be retracted and extracted, especially after people begin to use it. So what do you do in that case, right? It's not just you got out there and somebody used it unknowingly. It may have been then propagated tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of times in a very short window.
Yeah, we're seeing changes in this space, right? I mean, in the repositories, we're seeing that there's, the movement to use read-only code, for example, and make it so it's, you can only read, you can't modify code. So there's kind of, look, this is an evolution. We're all learning how to work in this new world and how fast things are changing, how to protect your information. I mean, data sovereignty is a big, big deal in certain countries, and obviously for obvious reasons, right? In the US, it's less of a concern. It seems to be more like we could propagate information and get it stored in multiple locations, but that also gives the opportunity for various actors to come out there and utilize that code. If whether it's malicious or not, they can utilize that code. So there has to be some rules in place. And again, I don't want to make this sound so black and white that it's on or off. There has to be a little bit of grayness in there, but there are ways to protect what you're doing. Having your code leak out into an LLM, well, how did it leak out in the first place? I mean, why was it in in a situation that it was able to leak out? And if it was, I mean, there needs to be corporate controls and governance and compliance within organizations to make sure things like that do not happen. I mean, we see this with a lot of different large companies, for example, with their roadmaps that went into LLMs, and they have that went out in the public domain for their 3 to 5 year roadmaps. That's not good, right? Companies don't want that, and obviously for obvious reasons, but that needs to be in control within the organization. And this is a new world we're living in, and we have to adjust to those compliance and those regulations appropriately.
Agreed. Guys, we got to take a break. We've got another topic and then a special report for today's show. So you're watching Techstrong Gang. We'll be back in a minute.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hi, everyone. We're back here on Techstrong Gang. So continuing our July 4th celebration theme today, our next topic is, do we need a Bill of Rights for developers? A couple of articles will be in the notes. One's on DevOps.com. One is a former, and two other are interviews on Techstrong TV. Mitch, why don't you kick this one?
Well, this is an outcropping or growth of developer experience. Like, there's been the talks of unionizing developers, things like guilds, things like that. Nothing's really come about that of any substance. But we are focusing on developer experience. In some cases, that's kind of masking this developer productivity. How do we get more for less or more for the same out of the same people? People don't always like to be told that, we're working on making you more productive. Your output needs to increase. It isn't always a compliment. Sometimes it is. It's interesting because one of our friends, you remember Dr. Nicole Forsgren, right? Mm-hmm. The Dora metrics. I know Paul's very familiar with this as well. Did a study, was commissioned by Microsoft to do a study on this, looking at what are some of the key factors around developer experience. So, is there a Bill of Rights? I don't know that there is that, but I think we have to kind of be more definitive about when we mean developer experience, what does that mean? And when we mean increasing productivity, it's not just about the developers. It's really about the whole system of getting, soft code into production or getting the output done. I mentioned Dora. I know that's a familiar, passionate topic of yours as well, Paul.
Absolutely. When I think of Dora and I think of the regulations for the DevOps community, it really does come down to a couple of points that you touched on, Mitch. Operational or developer efficiencies. No developer wants to hear that they need to be more efficient and more effective, right? Because they are doing what they can. But what I would say is, based on our research, based on our studies, we see that 75% of software companies are really looking to, improve their CI/CD pipelines. And the reason why is because the release of code is happening far more frequently than in the past. So what we see in our latest 2024 research study, 24% of organizations, 24% of organizations want to release code on an hourly basis, yet only 8% are able to do so. And part of this is, addressing the market change, addressing the developer experience, but also the customer experience. But I will say this: when we think about releasing code that rapidly, I use the example of Stonehenge. I don't know how this was done, and I'm not claiming to know how it was done, but if you take Stonehenge and you put a bunch of people underneath, a bunch of hands on that rock, and you push that rock up, I still don't believe, in my opinion, that a bunch of hands could lift that rock up to stand on top of the other rock. I see the same analogy with software development. You can't keep throwing bodies and developers at releasing code. So you have to start taking advantage of tech stacks like automation and AI in order to release that code on a regular basis. So there should be some type of rules and governance and compliance in place in order for the appropriate workflows to be delivered and the appropriate governance to be delivering those applications.
Isn't it ironic, Alan? We've gone from we only need developers in DevOps to now we need a Bill of Rights for developers.
It's the theme.
The pendulum swings.
The pendulum goes round and round, as does the wheel of karma.
I thought for a minute Paul was going to aliens are coming in to help developers write more code.
I mean, that might happen. We never know.
Well, but I'll tell you this, though. As we go forward in the future with AI, and AI does start doing more developer tasks, I think the delineation between what AI does and what humans do, in this case developers, is going to become more important. It's going to become, it can't be as wishy-washy. And humans, in this case developers, are going to want to have some rules that this is their purview. The law of robotics, no. But, this is what humans do, and this is how humans use AI in terms of developing. And maybe that'll change as time goes on and capabilities increase. But I do think if you don't carve these out, they're going to disappear. And it's important. Yeah, anyway, go ahead, Paul.
Just a quick comment on that. I think that there's absolutely a need for a human in the loop. There's no question. But there's also a desire. Actually, we see in our research that 67% of organizations are hiring generalists over specialists in specific areas. So they're really looking for organizations are looking to reduce the complexity of these deliveries, so it can be done with more of a generalist to do it. And really, the goal here is to take those actionable insights, apply it to the code, but have the human capital focus on more innovation and more higher value tasks and get the tedious tasks kind of handled by automation and AI. That's kind of where the goal is, I think, for most organizations.
Absolutely.
I'm going to put in a plug at the end of July. I think it's around the 28th. We're releasing AI and DevOps report. So we're specifically looking at how much is AI playing a role already throughout the development lifecycle, as well as what developers are doing. So stay tuned for that. I know Paul's on, kind of chomping at the bit to get a hold of that.
All righty. Hey, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to do one of our featured soloists. We have two. We have Bob Resselman, and then we have my friend Ira Winkler. Ira's little solos are called Byte Me. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ira is a well-known personality in the security space, but also a very accomplished security person, both in his time at the NSA and, also discovering one of the major hacks in historical hacks. But Ira also has strong opinions on the workplace, on the cyber market and everything else. In this episode, he's going to talk about, do CISOs need security experience? You would think so, but maybe not. We're going to go to Ira Winkler, and we'll be right back here after that.
Hi, this is Ira Winkler with today's episode of Byte Me. Today, I'm going to do something that I'm not overly comfortable doing, and it's going to be obvious why, and it amounts to essentially criticizing another, God, I don't even want to say it, another cybersecurity professional. And I feel bad because he's not even a cybersecurity professional, despite the fact he wasn't accepted a position as CISO of a Fortune 50 company. If you haven't figured it out now, I'm talking about the hack of UnitedHealthcare and their change group that they have. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, UnitedHealthcare is a incredibly large company, a Fortune 50, I believe, and they were a victim of a hack. And this hack, should say one of their subsidiaries was victim of a hack, which essentially shut down the ability for lots of bureaucratic paperwork to be processed in the United States, Change Healthcare. And that's what they do. And they're a critical part of the U.S. healthcare system, facilitating all this healthcare being delivered. And what happened was they were called in front of Congress, obviously, after a major hack, like Congress loves to do to get attention for themselves. And one of the criticisms Senator Wyden actually leveled was that the CISO of UnitedHealthcare, Steve Martin, has no cybersecurity experience. And honestly, when I heard that, I'm like, really? And I looked at it, and it's goddamn true. And the problem is, I was like shocked at this. So at one level, let's talk about why this is, or actually, let's talk about Steve's background first. And I'm going to read something quickly, but Steve was essentially the CIO and CTO of Optimum Insight at Optum, which is part of UnitedHealth Group. And by default, they are the default technology group. The people from there tended to be CISOs. But this guy also served as CISO of UnitedHealthcare. So he was the CIO and the CTO of a subsidiary, yet for whatever reason, they made him CISO of the entire company. And, you sit there and wonder, didn't he have enough to do being CIO and CTO of another subsidiary? But no, let's add to that role. And then he literally had no background, as Senator Wyden said, he had literally no background in cybersecurity. And, let's talk about, first off, I think the arrogance of taking a cybersecurity position, being CISO of a Fortune 50 company, having no experience whatsoever, you think, what the hell? And I was a CISO, and look, the thing is, I admit, as a CISO, you don't have to know hands-on technical duties of everybody under you. But having experience over decades, like a person in his position should, you develop your gut feel over time of what seems right, what seems wrong, how can it be improved, and so on. And in this case, he had no experience. He had no gut feel. He didn't know how to create a cybersecurity culture. He doesn't know when somebody comes to him who you might trust and say, look, I want to implement this. And he'd be like, the good CISO says, you know what? I trust you, but this isn't right. But more important, he didn't create the underlying culture that should allow the organization to be fundamentally secure, to drive everything. And I don't blame him at one level because he didn't know what to do. But fundamentally, he accepted the position. That's a problem. But why should a CISO have experience? A CISO has experience because they have, over time, they understand what needs to be done. They understand recommendations, how to approach things. They have networks that they build up of peers to go to with problems. They understand when something doesn't seem right, and it is not totally ironic that he was part of the technology program at Change Healthcare, which was the entity that was hacked before they were merged into UnitedHealthcare. So there are fundamental issues with this. And I don't have a lot of time for these pieces, so I'm just going to end this piece now, and I'm going to reiterate the fact that, yes, there is a problem when a Fortune 50 company doesn't go to dozens, if not hundreds, of qualified CISOs with potentially healthcare or related background to hire them for a CISO position. But they take someone who's just a technologist from another division and say, hey, we're going to add this to your role as well. That is negligence on the part of the board. And let me just say, UnitedHealthcare has some outstanding cybersecurity people working for them, and I've worked with them over decades. The problem is, in this case, they picked a leader of the organization who did not know what strategic direction to set. And fundamentally, you don't just say, hey, why not? Let me just add CISO to my resume because, hey, I'm kind of busy enough in two full-time jobs. Let me just add a third because it looks really cool on the resume. And yes, for that, I blame him because he trivialized the entire cybersecurity profession by saying yes to the request. He could have easily said no, and he should know dozens of people who could have stepped up for that position to focus on cybersecurity, not do it as an afterthought. So anyway, this is Ira Winkler. In this case, I will say Byte Me to UnitedHealthcare for actually going ahead and hiring an unqualified person for the most senior cybersecurity role that they have in the organization.
Hey, we're back. Hope you enjoyed Ira's rant. You know, Ira likes to rant, but his rants usually make a lot of sense, and thank him for doing them. Mitchell, Paul, that's going to wrap up our Techstrong gang today. You know, this is day before July 4th, right? We're going to be, when we're closed tomorrow, we won't have a fresh show, and we're taking Friday off for an extended holiday. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say, hey, this is going to be the 248th birthday of the United States of America. One of the grandest experiments in democracy and freedom and rights that the world has ever seen. And probably like no time other in my lifetime and in most of our lifetimes, our freedoms and our democracy are being pushed, pulled, tested in ways that I think our founding fathers never even dreamed of. I think our discussions today reflect that, right? We are more so than, as I said, any time in my lifetime, we are heading into very uncertain waters. And this experiment in democracy that we live in here in the U.S. is under pressures that I don't think it's seen in a very, very long time. I consider myself a patriot. Mitchell, Paul, I know you do too, right? And no matter what your political party or persuasion is, we all want to see what's best for our country. We may have different attitudes of what's best, but we want what's best for our country and for our fellow citizens and what's best for the world. We live in a worldwide, it's a small world after all kind of time right now. So take a moment this weekend, give thanks that we live under the freedoms we do, that we can have these discussions like we've had today here on Techstrong Gang. But remember that freedom isn't free, or There's a cost to freedom, and that's your participation. Participate, learn, educate yourself about these issues and issues that affect you in government. Because if you don't have a right to say what someone else does then, and because you didn't partake in it. So I'll leave it at that. Have a happy 4th of July, everyone. We'll be back next week here on Techstrong Gang. Mitchell, Paul, thanks for participating. And we'll see you all on the other side. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.